Good morning. Today we are factoring again ax squared plus bx plus c. This first one is going to be a review when a is really just the number 1. Then we'll get into some today that are a little bit more challenging when a is something other than a positive 1. So first remember we multiply our first term and our last term to figure out what goes on the top of our diamond. So 14 times t squared is just 14t squared. Our middle term goes on the bottom. That's a positive 9t. And then we need to figure out what to multiply to make 14, but add to get 9. So the only multiples of 14 are 1 and 14, and 2 and 7. So the only ones that add to get 9 are 2t and 7t. So these two are our middle terms that go in our diagonal, 2t and 7t. Our first term from our equation, t squared, goes in the first box, and our last term from the equation goes in the last box, 14. And then we simply just need to figure out what multiplies to get t squared. Well, t times t is t squared. What multiplies to get 7t? Well, 7 times t. And then here, 2 times t will give me 2t in this box. And then double check your last box. Does it make 14? 7 times 2. And it does. So our answer, when we factor this piece right here, is going to be our two sets of parentheses, which is t plus 7 times t plus 2. Those were our two sets of parentheses that we factored out of this piece. So that's our answer. Here's another one, but now our A, our first letter here, is a 2. And that's okay, we're going to follow the same process. The only thing that's different is when we get over here, it might be a little bit more challenging. So first multiply your first and your last term. 2x squared times 3 is now 6x squared. So 2 times 3 is 6. In the middle we have a negative 7x. And then what multiplies to get 6? Well, we either have 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. The only numbers that are going to add to give us a negative 7, well, we must have some negatives. Two negatives must multiply to make a positive, and they must be then 1x and 6x, not 7, 6. Those two multiply to make a positive 6x squared, and add to make a negative 7. So these two go in our diagonal, negative 1x, negative 6x. Be careful, our first term is 2x squared. Some people want to take these, we're done with those. Our last term is 3. And now this is where it's a little bit tricky. We need to figure out where do we put the numbers that multiply to get 2x squared. Well, I know we need two x's, one here and one here. But I also need the number 2. Well, the only things that multiply to get 2 are 1 times 2. So if I put the 2 here, that won't make sense because 2 times something isn't going to give me negative 1. So instead of putting the 2 on the top with that x, I need to put the 2 on this side because I can multiply something by 2 to get negative 6. So we have 1x and 2x, that multiplies to get 2x squared. Then our second box over here, 2x times what gives me negative 6x? Well, 2 times negative 3 would give me negative 6 and an x. Then our last box down here, 1 times what is negative 1? When 1 times negative 1 will give you negative 1. And this is why it's important to check your last box. Does negative 3 times negative 1 give you a positive 3? Yes, it does. So my answer is 1x minus 3 times 2x minus 1. That is my answer to factoring that equation or that trinomial. Alright, here's another one. Difference with the a being a number other than 1, but that's okay. We're still going to follow the same process. 3 times 4 is 12 with the t squared. Middle term on the bottom is 8t. And then what multiplies to get 12? Well, 1 times 12, but that's not going to give me 8. 3 times 4 or 2 times 6. Well, the only ones that add to get 8 are 2t and 6t. So those go in our diagonal here, 2t, 6t. Our first term up here was 3t squared. Our last term is 4. And then we need to figure out what multiplies to get this. Well, I know I need a t and a t. Where should the 3 go? Well, 3 times, I can't put on the top because I can't get a 2 there, so I need the 3 on the left side, because then I can multiply 3 times 2 to give me 6. And then down here, t times 2 give me 2t. And then our last box, 2 times 2, yes, is 4. So my answer, when I factor this, is t plus 2, and then 3t plus 2. That gives us that trinomial. So you're always going to have 2 sets of parentheses here. This next one we need to be careful of. I have a little star here. If we can, we need to factor out what we have in common first. Remember last couple lessons ago, we took an equation like this that was maybe like 4x squared plus 12x plus 8, and we factored out what they had in common. For example, these are all multiples of 4. So we'd be left with x squared plus 3x plus 2 if we factor those out, because 4 times 3 is 12 and 4 times 2 is 8. So if we can pull out a number out front, then we can use whatever's left inside our parentheses to factor using our diamond in our box. So think, if, oopsies, I'm going to go back to our, where's our, here we go. So we need to factor out, well, I just realized we made a mistake because this one goes to slide 5. It's really slide 4, but that's all right. So like I said, we need to factor out what these have in common first. So what do all of these have in common? Well, they don't have any numbers in common. They're 1, 2, and 3. But if a out front here, ax squared plus bx plus c, if a is a negative, we need to factor that negative out if we can. It's just a rule we have to follow. So these all, we could factor out a -1 here, and that would leave us with what left over. If I factor out a negative times a negative, a negative times a positive will give us this. A -1 times a positive 1x will give us a -1x. And then a -1 times a positive, nope, I'm lying, a -2 will give us positive 2. All we essentially did, you guys, was factor out a -1 and all the signs changed. From a negative to a positive, from a negative to a positive, or from a positive to a negative. When you factor out a -1, the signs just change. So now we're going to factor what's left in parentheses here. So multiply our first and our last terms. 3x squared times -2 is -6x squared. We have a 1x in the middle. What multiplies to get -6? Well, either 1 and 6 or 2 and 3, so it better be 2x and 3x to give us 1. However, one of them needs to be negative in order to multiply to make -6. It has to be the -2 in order to leave us with more positives. So these two go in our diagonal on the sides, -2x and positive 3x. And then our first term from up here is 3x squared. Our last term is a -2. So what multiplies to get 3x squared? Well, x times x. And where should the 3 go, on the top or the left? Well, in order to multiply and make everything work out nicely, it would make sense to put a 3 in the left because they all are multiples of 3. So 3x times 1 is 3x. X times -2 is -2x. And then a negative times a positive is a negative. So our answer, this factored, we factored out a -1, but then we also have our 2 sets of parentheses. We have x plus 1, and we have 3x minus 2. Your answer key will list it like this. They might not put the 1 there, they just might leave it as negative, and then x plus 1 and 3x minus 2. Alright, let's keep going. It says solve the equation or find the zeros of the function. Note, these mean the same thing. Remember, what we're really doing is trying to figure out where our parabola is going to cross the x-axis. This one might cross at 1 and negative 4. That's what our two answers are. So solving or finding the zeros or the roots, this is what we're really looking for. So in order to do this, first think, can you factor out what they have in common? Nope, they don't have any numbers in common, any letters in common. So we're going to use our diamond to factor. So draw yourself a box or a diamond, and a box while you're at it if you'd like. Your test will not have diamonds and boxes. You will need to draw those on your own. So we have this whole piece. We need to factor it. Multiply our first and our last term. We have 7 times 3w squared. That gives us 21w squared. On the bottom we have 22w. So let's think what multiplies to get 21 but adds to get 22. Well, the multiples of 21 are 21 and 1, or 7 times 3. So in order to get 22, we have to have 21w and 1w. And then our first term in the first box, from up here, 3w squared. Our last term is 7. So then factor this. What multiplies to get 3w squared? Well, w times w. Where should the 3 go? Well, if I put the 3 over here, that's not going to work to get 1. So the 3 has to go on the top. So w times 1 over here will give us 1w. 3w times what is 21? Well, 3 times 7 is 21. And then check your last box. 7 times 1 is 7. So our answer, so far we have 3w plus 1 and w plus 7. But this one was equal to 0, so we need to actually solve it. Remember, if this times this is 0, well, one of these has to be equal to 0 in order to equal 0. So we'll set them both equal to 0. 3w plus 1 equal to 0, and w plus 7 equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 1. We have 3w equals negative 1. And divide by 3. We get w equals a negative 1/3. And over here, if I add 7, we get w equals, oh, not add 7, silly me. This is w plus 7, so we need to subtract 7. So we get w equals a negative 7. And those are our two solutions, or our two answers. Alright, a little bit of a review here. We're nearing the end of our chapter. We have one lesson left, but so just to do a little review, if we have two terms that are multiplied 2 by 2 and it says find the product, we can multiply them by using a box. We can write y plus 5 times y minus 3. So y times y is y squared. Y times 5 is 5y. Y times negative 3 is negative 3y. And negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. So our answer, highest exponent first, we have y squared. We can combine these two. 5y and a negative 3y give us a total of 2y. And then minus 15. There's our answer for that product. This one is very similar. The exponent is a 2, so we need to write this 2 times. 2t minus 6, 2t minus 6. You can only distribute the exponent if everything is multiplied, and it's not, there's a subtraction, so you cannot take that shortcut. So, drawing your box to multiply here. We have the same thing on both sides, so it doesn't matter which one you put where. 2t minus 6. Two t minus 6. So 2 times 2 is 4. T times t is t squared. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12 with the t. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12 with the t again. And a negative times a negative makes a positive 36. So then we have 4t squared. And then we have a negative 12t and another negative 12t. Same sign, add them up, that's negative 24t. And then last, plus 36. Alright, third one like this. This one's a little bit more challenging because we have 1, 2, 3 terms multiplied by 2 terms. So we need to draw a box that is 2 by 3 so we can multiply. So 3 terms across the top, 3x to the third minus 2x squared plus 4. On the other side we have 5x squared minus 8. This is a nice review of what we've done earlier in this chapter. And then we're going to multiply. 5 times 3 is 15. Count up how many x's you have. You have 2 here and 3 there. That's x to the power of 5. You never multiply the exponents there. Always count up how many you have total. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. We have 2 x's here and 2 here for a total of 4. What I mean by that is you are really multiplying the x's. You have 2 here and then 3 more for a total of 5. So we have x to the 5th. We're not multiplying the exponents. We are multiplying the x's. Then we have 5 times 4, which is 20, with the x squared. Negative 8 times 3 is negative 24, and there's an x to the third. A negative times a negative makes a positive. 8 times 2 is 16, and there's an x squared up top. And then last, negative 8 times 4. 8 times 4 is 32, and it's negative. So we have to write out our answer from the highest degree to the lowest. So our highest exponent we have is to the 5th power. So we have 15x to the 5th. Then we have to the 4th power. This is the only one with an exponent of 4. So minus 10x to the 4th. We only have 1 down here to the power of 3. Minus 24x to the 3rd power. We have 2 with x squareds. We have a positive 20 and a positive 16. So if I add those up, that's a positive 36x squared. And then last, minus 32. It looks like a long answer, but they all have different exponents. We have to leave them written out individually. One last question we need to solve. This is using our vertical motion model. H equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. A couple reminders before we start. S is going to be our starting height, or our initial height, whatever they list it as. V is our velocity. H is our ending height. If they don't tell you your starting or your ending height, assume it's the ground, 0. And then last, t is time, which we're going to try and find. So we're not going to ever plug anything in for t. That's what we try and solve, unless they tell you it. So we're cliff diving. It says a cliff jumper jumps from a ledge 96 feet above the ocean. So they are starting, this is going to be S, 96 feet above the ocean, which is 0, with an initial upward velocity. So our velocity is 16 feet per second. How long does it take until the diver enters the water? So let's plug in what we know. Our ending height is going to be the water, which is a height of 0. So we have 0 equals negative 16t squared. Remember, we're trying to find t. Plus vt. V is our velocity, which is 16, so 16t. Plus our starting height, which is 96. So first thing, we could factor right away using our diamond, but we know, just like factoring out a -1 earlier, we know these terms all have some things in common. We can factor out at least a multiple of something. They're all multiples of 2. We also need to factor out the negative as well. I'm going to just put on this side. I'm factoring out a -1, or a negative, and what number? I know 16 both have multiples of 4, they're both multiples of 8. So I'm going to type in my calculator 96 divided by 4 and see if that works out to be a nice number. 96 divided by 4 is 24, but let me see if I can divide by 8, and you can. I can pull out a -8 from all of these terms. So that would leave me 2, because -8 times 2 is 16, and this t squared. 16, to get to 16, -8 times -2t will give me a positive 16t. If I pull out a negative here, a negative times a negative needs to be a positive, and 8 times 12 is 96. So now I have this to factor, which, man, I could have even pulled out a bigger number. I could have pulled out 16, because these are all multiples of 2 as well. I'm going to go back here and fix that. If you don't, you technically will get the same answer in the end. Oopsies. But it'll just make our factoring a lot easier. And you always want to factor out the biggest number that you can. I should have checked 16. So 16 times 1t squared is going to give us a -16. -16 times -1t is going to give me a positive 16. And 96 divided by 16, if you're not sure, plug it in your calculator, gives me 6. So it has to be a -6 because 2 negatives will multiply to make a positive. So now this is what we have. Sorry about that confusion. -16, 1t squared minus 1t minus 6 equal to 0. I just flipped it around. So let's use our diamond and then our box. So first, ooh, that was a little squiggly. That's okay. Multiply our first and our last term. Gives us a -6t squared and a -1t. So the only things that multiply to get -6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. So it has to be 2t and 3t in order to add to get a -1. We need more negatives, so it must be a -3t. Sorry, that looks like all combined. A -3t. There we go. So we have 2t and -3t. Our first term is t squared, or 1t squared. Our last term is -6. So I have t times t will give me t squared. If you want to put 1s there, you can. You don't need to. Makes it easier for us later if we don't. And then we have t times -3 is -3t. T times 2 is 2t. And then check to make sure your last box works. It does, so our two answers we have are t minus 3 and t plus 2 equal to 0. However, don't forget we have this -16 that we factored out as well. So it's equal to 0, so we need to set all parts equal to 0. -16 equals 0, t minus 3 equals 0, and t plus 2 equals 0. Now, if you were just writing the factors, you would list it like this. However, -16 equals 0 doesn't make sense, so we can ignore that. If I add 3 here, t is 3. If I subtract 2, t is a -2. So think, what were they asking us? It says, how long will it take until the diver enters the water? My two options are either 3 seconds or -2 seconds. Well, we can't have negative time, so our answer is 3 seconds. All right, your homework is worksheet 9.6, And you have to do 1 through 33 odds, but then after 33, which is on the back side, you have to do all of these problems. We already did this one, but you need to try the other two. This bottom one is going to be a challenge, but I would like you to try it.